Positive training is not about letting the dog run the house. It is about teaching the dog what works, what does not work, and what we want instead. You can be kind and still be clear. You can use rewards and still have boundaries. You can say no without scaring the dog. You can stop unwanted behavior without becoming harsh. Today, I want to talk about one of the biggest misunderstandings in dog training, the idea that positive training means permissive training. People think if you use rewards, food, praise, and science based training, it means you never say no, you never have rules, and dogs get to do whatever they want. This is not true. Positive training does not mean permissive training. There are definitely, I would say, two extremities that I see a lot of. Owners often get pulled between the two extremities. This is even about dog training. Dog trainers get pulled to these two extremities. I was in that situation as well. So, extreme one is, be the alpha, correct the dog, show them who's boss, don't let them dominate you. The other extreme is never say no, never interrupt, let the dog choose everything. Any boundary is bad. So both extremes can confuse owners. The dogs need safety, clarity, structure, rewards, and boundaries. Positive reinforcement means we reward behaviors we want to see more of. But that does not mean we ignore everything else. I mean, we ask, what is the dog doing? Why is the dog doing it? What do I want the dog to do instead? How do I make that behavior easier? How do I reward the right choice? Well, if all you do is say no, you haven't trained the dog. You've only told them what has failed. If all you do is say no, you haven't trained the dog. You've only told them what has basically failed. So one thing I think too that we should, be clear about is that saying no is not abuse. This is important to understand because I say no to dogs. Of course I do. But the question is not whether you say no. The question is, what does no mean and what happens after? No should not mean fear, yelling, intimidation, pain, panic, confusion. No can mean stop. No can mean reset. No can even mean come with me in some circumstances. Try a different choice. That choice does not work. I'm going to help you make a better one. No should be information, not intimidation. Information is important when working with your dog. Boundaries are not mean, all right? Owners feel so guilty when they create boundaries, whether it's, they're using a crate or they want a break, or even using the leash inside the house, or using place, using baby gates. A dog has to always be with them. Boundaries are not supposed to be something that is bad, okay? So I want you to start understanding that boundaries are very important. Just like boundaries that we create for ourselves in relationships, in real life, the same thing we have to do with dogs, okay? A boundary is not a punishment. A boundary is a fence around success, okay? Boundaries are also how we prevent chaos while the dog is still learning. Management is also a huge part of training. Management, again, is not failure. I think in a lot of circumstances, we already feel guilty for a lot of things. Social media, society has just done that in general. But with dogs, it's the same. Management is not about failure. Management is like using distance with reactive dogs, using a long line for recalls to strengthen that recall, using a crate for puppy naps or taking breaks, using gates to prevent counter surfing. It's not the only thing you do, but it's about management. We're talking about management. If I'm not home, it doesn't matter how many times someone would reward or even correct behaviors like jumping on the counter. Because if I'm not home and that's happening throughout the day, the dog isn't crated or there's no playpens kind of blocking the kitchen or whatever, well, then the behavior is just being rehearsed over and over. Closing blinds to kind of break the window barking, not having them open all the time. Again, this is about management. It's not the way to solve the problem, but it's a way to help desensitize. It's part of the management style, it's part of the process. A lot of people, again, when you're looking at the extremities, they think that's the answer, meaning like, oh, I'm not just going to close the blinds for the rest of my life, right? I mean, come on. We're a little bit more realistic than that. You can't look at these extremities of what we're trying to accomplish with whatever training style you're using. Okay? Yeah, another one. This is reward based does not mean bribery. Owners say to me all the time, at least not the clientele I deal with now mostly, but back in the day, as I was making the transition, I had this comment all the time: I don't want to bribe dogs, right? I don't want to use treats and bribe them. There's a difference, right? So bribery is like showing food first because the dog won't work without seeing the payment, right? Training and teaching a behavior and then marking the right choice and then rewarding them, that is a big difference compared to bribing. Also, food is not forever. Food builds the behavior. And then you start using life rewards to actually continue the process as the years go on. So it might start with food and then it builds up into the life rewards, like, oh, you were such a good dog, we get to go for a walk. You were so calm, like, this is great. You get to go, let's throw the ball for 10 minutes or whatever. But the point is that you want to pick and choose and work on the times when we're having good behaviors. Food is not forever. And you just have to keep in the back of your mind that food truly builds the behavior we're looking for. Then you move on to the life rewards, praise, access, freedom. That's real world reinforcement, right? Food is not the relationship. Food is a tool we use to build the relationship. A dog still needs consequences. This is where I'm going to define what consequences really mean, because people hear consequences and they think balance training, they think negative. And whenever they think negative, they think aggressive or angry. I want to touch base on. So consequences can be pulling makes forward movement stop. A very common tactic called red light, green light. That is a consequence, right? Jumping makes attention pause. So when I jump, I don't get the attention. That's a consequence. That's a correction. Barking at the window means we move away from the window. So getting my dog to move away from the window because the barking is happening, I'm removing them from their pedestal. I'm letting them know that this is not a behavior I need right now. And so I'm taking away that position from them. That, again, is not something that you're not yanking them away, right? Biting clothes means interaction stops. So if my dog is biting me, I'm no longer interacting with them. Some people will continue to interact. I want to get up, I want to walk away. I can say no. I can whatever words, phrase you want to say to just, I find a lot of this is also about keeping your sanity. It's important to be vocal. Lunging means we create distance. That's another consequence. That's another correction. So the consequence should teach. The consequence shouldn't scare the dog. That is really the big difference right there. Let's use some real life examples. Let's say a dog jumps on someone, right? Old school approach. What are some of the old school stuff I used to do? Knee. I would either give the dog like a really good knee, tie kick kind of thing, a knee to the chest area. I would maybe be very loud. I would probably also, if the leash was on, I would probably correct very hard, like a very strong leash check, let's say. The permissive approach of that would be the opposite. Again, going back to the two extremities, right, would be ignoring everything, no structure, and then the dog just keeps rehearsing it, right? So My approach would be leash on, let's say, prevent rehearsal. So, for example, someone comes over, jump happens, I walk away, I create that distance. I start getting people to touch my dog when 4 paws are on the ground. 2 paws go up. Once again, we gain our distance. So, we're getting our dog to understand that you don't get to say hi unless those 4 paws are on the ground. Every time the 2 feet come off, the consequence is that we gain distance away from giving him or her access to what the dog wants in that moment, which is my friend or whoever. This is how we can start. And then you can create it into something bigger, like having them go on a boundary or having them on a spot while your guest comes over, getting them to wait for the off cue in order to go say hi. But everything kind of builds, right? I'm not waiting for the dog to fail, right? I'm setting the dog up to succeed. That's really a big difference in the extremities versus like what I do. Like I said last time, these are things that I've done a little bit of everything in the past. And it was confusing even as a dog trainer because there's so many techniques out there. And it's kind of like you got to follow one and that's that, right? Kind of going through everything. It wasn't for any other reason other than what I personally experienced through the dogs I worked with and so on. I don't think I'm better than anyone, but one thing I do feel that I have, and not even in the context of like over anyone else, but in the context of like me being able to confidently say that the way I train, like this is where I think we should be, is simply because of the 20 years I've been doing this, of being an alpha trainer who was all about dominance, who was all about the leash checks, who was all about even prongs and e-collars at one point, to even a little bit of going to an extremity and seeing the never say no and all of that. That transition for me took quite a few years. But where I am now in the context of science-based positive reinforcement is the byproduct of going through all of those things. And so I'll give you an example. It's not exactly off topic, but I'll give you an example. When I was in the transition of going to alpha to more positive approach, you could call it balance training, I noticed that like I still felt like I had to give certain corrections. Like the dog responded faster to specific corrections, and then I would reward. So this is where I was kind of like in the balance training era of things. So I would let them know physically that was not okay, even though in my brain I would say like, no, the dog is not scared, the dog just respects me. So I would correct, finally get the response that I'm looking for. And then I would, of course, reward the behavior, which was usually praise or food or whatever. But that was more of the balance approach. And I kept kind of seesawing back to the balance approach because I felt like I needed the correction. I needed to have the correction in order for that dog to get it, to learn it. But what I realized is that it wasn't even about the dog. The reason why I felt like I needed the correction is because I needed the client to be happy. And I needed the result to be quick. And so over time, I just figured out ways where I could erase that part of it, the correctional part, aversive correctional part of it, without having to do that. I obviously kind of found that perfect middle ground where I'm science-based, I'm positive reinforcement, and I'm able to use, again, consequences, corrections, whatever you want to call it, in the context of generally removing something away or not giving something, right? Not giving the affection at that time, etc. Because what I found through all of this is that the correction only works if the dog is somewhat nervous or unsure about your style of correction. Once the dog was a little bit timid or fearful, it was very easy to get the dog to do whatever you want. Obviously, there's some extremities, dogs who have major issues, it's a little different. But in most cases, who's that? Doggy Dad, I think. It's a great example, right? Where he just kind of takes the dog and he's just leash checking the dog pretty much, but basically just holding the dog back until the dog stops lunging. and then he's able to pet the dog and the dog is not attacking anymore. This is generally like flooding, right? So to me, we're increasing the fear by doing this. So this is a little too extreme in the context, but in a lot of people's eyes, you see it and you don't see the science behind it. And so all we see is that the dog is now no longer reacting. And so it looks okay. I'm just giving you a piece of like how my mind works when I would do that stuff, because that was obviously, even though it looks very magical, if you look at any of the trainers that work with more of a dominant approach or an alpha approach, you'll notice that they actually all do that. They just probably don't record it like that, but we all did this. And yeah, of course, the dog would basically submit to a certain degree, at least, as time went on. But I felt like it's because they had to. And so again, sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but as I was going through all of this, I just realized that I didn't have to do those things in order to get what I wanted. It takes longer. And the reason why it takes longer is because I'm not scaring the dog, to a degree at least, in order to get the result I'm looking for. They don't have to feel that pinch, for example, or the shock in order to get the behavior, because now we're just masking the actual reactivity or whatever is going on until they explode one day. And I've seen it. I've seen it many times. Regardless, what's that saying? The only thing two dog trainers will agree on is that the third dog trainer was wrong, right? So I just think that, I don't know if this is condescending to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I just feel like you can't talk about another technique if you have not used that technique, if that makes sense. So I don't think, and again, I would like to think that the way I'm speaking is I'm not saying that this technique is trash or this technique is trash. I'm just letting you know what has worked and what hasn't for me and why I do it the way I do it now. But I'm not someone who's coming in saying, you need to do it like this because this is what I learned. I'm saying I prefer to do it like this because of the experiences I've had over the 20 years of using all different forms of techniques. Like Dr. Ian Dunbar is my idol in so many ways. He's incredible. 20 years ago, I thought he was a joke. Yeah, sure, I was immature. There's a lot of reasons, right? But in the context of like how he would work things and life rewards and the positive training side of things, and I was just like, oh, eye roll, big eye rolls, right? Not knowing that this man is an absolute legend, right? So that's a great example of that experience, right? Growing and learning and having kids of my own was also a big kind of piece of that. Let's get back on topic here. This kind of leads into the next thing anyways, which is positive training requires more skill, not less. Now, that is not to say that the other techniques or whatever, I'm not bashing, okay? What I'm just trying to say is that it actually takes more skill to focus on the positive training side of things. It's like the same thing with child. It's much easier for me to rip the TV off the wall and slam it down because the kid didn't listen to me. I've seen some videos of that. And yeah, the kid shapes up right away, right? But we're also creating issues with all of those things. Positive training is not an easy way out. It requires timing, observation, planning, patience, and understanding the behavior. It's not everyone's cup of tea. Of course not. It was not mine, that's for sure. So when people are working with their dogs, it's normal. This is why the other techniques are still very exciting and very popular, because they're out there because of the result they get. And the result is usually a little bit faster. And it's faster because, once again, the way it's being done, it requires understanding the behavior, not just this is how you fix this behavior kind of thing. And it's not just about tossing cookies. Okay? I hear that all the time. You need to know when to reward, when to interrupt, when to create distance, when to lower the difficulty, when to manage, when to pause, when the dog is over threshold, when the dog needs sleep, when the owner is expecting too much, right? Good positive training is not soft, it is strategic. I gave up so many times when I was going through the phases because it was too hard and there was too much involved in not just picking up that slip lead or that choker and giving that, just getting that correction in. And so it took a long time to get over that situation. I guess what I'm trying to say here is there was a lot more to positive reinforcement and positive training than you think. It's not just about throw some treats here and there, XYZ kind of thing. If you've noticed in all of my podcasts, I almost never talk about breed. And what I mean by that is, sure, temperament wise, breed specific wise, you might have a few things that are common, but I never mix genetics with the behavior problems that they have. And it's just because it's not true in most cases. I really focus on why the dog is getting into the zone they're getting into. Anxiety, the behavior's been rehearsed too many times, and so on. You know what? I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. I want you to pick one behavior that your dog struggles with. All right. What is my dog practicing right now? How can I prevent the wrong rehearsal? What do I want instead? How can I make that easier? And how can I reward that clearly? That's your thought process, okay? You're all going to be a dog trainer for a day, all right? So pick one behavior your dog struggles with, and now you're going to ask these questions. What is my dog practicing right now? How can I prevent the wrong rehearsal? What do I want instead? How can I make that easier? And how can I reward that clearly? I'll give you an example. Instead of stop jumping, teach go to place or four paws on the floor. Instead of stop barking, teach come away from the window. Instead of stop pulling, teach loose leash makes us move forward. Instead of stop biting, teach chew this, take a break, or a nap. Stop only asking what you don't want. Start training what you do want. This is extremely important. We only focus on what we don't want typically. Our dog is sitting there being a good dog, laying there doing absolutely nothing. We're watching TV. Only when our dog starts to lose it and go crazy are we saying, oh, maybe the dog needs to go for a walk, right? No, instead, when the dog is calm, relaxed, you know the walk is coming anyways, that's when you decide, you know what, you're being so good, let's go for a walk. Because I want my dog to learn that the more calm you are, the more likely I am to pay attention to you, right? This was a big one. I think this was a great session because not only did I get into the whole question behind positive training doesn't mean that you have to bribe, right? But we also got into a little bit about how I do things. Hopefully, some people will listen to this and just try different ways of doing things. Even if it doesn't, I don't need you to change what you're doing. Hopefully, you get something out of this podcast. I guess that's all I'm saying. So, no, positive training does not mean permissive training. It does not mean no rules. It does not mean the dog runs the house. It means we teach clearly, we reward what we want, we manage what the dog is not ready for, we use boundaries without intimidation, we say no in a way that gives information, not fear. Because your dog does not need confusion, okay? Our dog needs clarity. If you're in Montreal, the West Island, Laval, surrounding areas, and you need help with puppy training, leash reactivity, please don't be shy. DM us, message us, look us up. Canine Education, Josh, the dog father. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thank you so much. And I love the fan mail, so please keep it coming. I'm just curious. Comment below. Let me know what would be something you would love to hear in one of my next podcasts. Okay? I want you to decide what I'm going to do next. All right. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye.